Barron Trump dismantles top TV host on live television. His words send shockwaves across America. The studio pulsed under the glare of bright stage lights, each one calibrated to catch every subtle shift in expression, every crack in composure, every unspoken challenge. Cameras zoomed in, primed to capture history in the making. A charged energy filled the room, thick and unshakable, rippling through the audience like a silent storm before the first strike. Across the country, millions sat motionless, transfixed by what was about to unfold. And at the center of it all, poised and razor-sharp, sat Emily Harper, ready for a battle of words she thought she could control. But tonight, her guest wasn't a politician. Before we get into the details, let me know in the comments where you are watching this video from. Opposite her sat Barron Trump. The name was well known, whispered in political circles for years, though he had rarely stepped into the limelight himself. That was about to change. Dressed in a sleek, dark suit tailored to perfection, he exuded a calm that almost felt unnatural. His posture was relaxed, his gaze unwavering, showing no signs of nerves despite the weight of the moment. Emily, seated across from him, took a slow breath, her mind already running through the questions she had carefully prepared. She wasn't here for small talk. She had spent years crafting the kind of questions that left no escape, no room for polished, rehearsed responses. The moment the opening music faded into silence, the audience instinctively leaned forward. The time for pleasantries was over. A faint smirk played on Emily's lips as she finally spoke. "Barron," she began, her voice even, controlled, laced with just the right amount of challenge. "This interview, this moment, is something a lot of people have been waiting for." Barron met her gaze, unbothered. "Is that so?" His voice was smooth, measured, as if he had all the time in the world. Emily leaned in slightly, her eyes gleaming with sharp anticipation. "You're a name everyone recognizes, yet very few actually know you. That changes tonight." The tension in the room thickened. The game had officially begun. For years, Emily Harper had built a career on dismantling the facades of the powerful. She was an expert at uncovering hidden truths, at forcing even the most impenetrable minds to reveal something real. And tonight, her target was a young man who had grown up under the relentless microscope of political scrutiny, but had never spoken for himself. Until now. She crossed one leg over the other, her fingers tapping lightly against the glossy surface of her desk. Every question she had lined up was designed to unsettle, to peel back any carefully constructed persona. She had spent weeks preparing, anticipating his every move. She smiled, a calculated, knowing smile. "For someone born into such a powerful legacy," she said, tilting her head slightly, "you've managed to remain quite the mystery. People have seen you, but they haven't heard you. Why is that?" The question was deliberate, designed to box him into a response that would either make him seem evasive or force him to reveal something he wasn't ready to share. Barron leaned back slightly, his movements deliberate. His hands remained loosely clasped, his expression giving away nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Silence isn't always absence, Emily," he said. "Sometimes it's preparation." A murmur rippled through the audience. His answer wasn't defensive. It was strategic. Emily's brow arched. He had sidestepped her first trap with ease. If subtlety wouldn't shake him, she would shift to pressure. "You've been in the public eye your entire life," she continued, her gaze narrowing slightly. "Whether you wanted it or not, people have formed opinions about you. Do you ever feel like you're simply a product of perception? That no matter what you say tonight, the world has already decided who you are?" It was a loaded question. If he admitted he was shaped by public perception, he risked looking like he lacked identity. If he denied it, he could come across as out of touch. Barron exhaled softly, letting a few seconds of silence stretch between them, controlling the space rather than rushing to fill it. "Perception is an interesting thing," he finally said. "It usually says more about the people doing the observing than the person being observed." Emily's eyes flickered. He wasn't just responding, he was redirecting. This wasn't the reaction of someone caught off guard. This was the move of someone who had anticipated the attack. She adjusted her posture, her smirk widening just slightly. This was going to be more interesting than she had expected. She picked up her notes, her movements deliberate. "All right," she said, her voice smooth. "Let's talk about the weight of your name." The audience barely breathed. They could feel it. The real battle was about to begin. She placed her notes down, folding her hands neatly on top of them. The act was intentional, a silent declaration that she didn't need scripted questions to dismantle her guest. Her eyes locked onto Barron's, sharp and unyielding. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice carrying a subtle edge. "Your last name is one of the most polarizing in modern history. It carries power, controversy, and expectation. Whether you like it or not, it has shaped how people see you. My question is simple. Has it also shaped how you see yourself?" Barron met her gaze without flinching. He did not shift in his chair, did not fidget under the weight of the question. Instead, he exhaled slowly, controlled. "Everyone is shaped by where they come from," he said, his tone measured. "But the difference between being shaped and being defined is a matter of choice." Emily let his answer linger in the air. It was clean, polished, a near-perfect sidestep, but she wasn't about to let him slip away that easily. "You speak of choice," she pressed, leaning forward slightly. "But how much choice have you really had? You were born into wealth, power, and influence. You didn't have to fight for a place at the table. You inherited it. Would you say that's privilege, or do you reject that label?" The air in the room thickened. It was a well-placed trap. If Barron admitted to privilege, he risked alienating those who resented power. If he denied it, he would be branded as detached from reality. But Barron didn't react. He didn't tense. Instead, he offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Privilege is an interesting word," he mused. "If a doctor's child grows up with access to the best education, are they privileged? If a musician's son grows up surrounded by music, is that privilege? Or is privilege just another way of saying that some people start their journey differently?" Emily's fingers twitched against the desk. He wasn't answering the question. He was reframing it, reshaping the very structure of the conversation. She leaned back slightly, her smirk returning. This wasn't going to be easy. And for the first time that night, she realized Barron Trump wasn't here to be questioned. He was here to take control of the conversation. Emily took a slow breath, her fingers tracing the edge of the desk. He was good. Too good. She had seen seasoned politicians buckle under pressure, crack beneath the weight of a well-placed question. But Barron Trump? He wasn't just answering. He was steering. She couldn't let him dictate the rhythm. "All right," she said, tilting her head, her voice deceptively casual. "Let's take your name out of the equation. Imagine you weren't a Trump. No legacy, no recognition. Do you think people would still be listening to you right now?" Barron exhaled, a flicker of something knowing in his eyes. He didn't need time to think. His answer came effortlessly. "People listen to me because of my name," he admitted. "But if I had nothing worth saying, would they still be listening now?" The room erupted. Applause, murmurs, sharp glances exchanged between audience members. It was an answer that neutralized the attack and turned it back on her. Emily pressed her lips together, suppressing the smallest flicker of irritation. This was her game. She set the pace, controlled the flow. But Barron Trump wasn't here to be led. She knew she had to move fast. "All right," she said, leaning forward, her tone dropping just slightly. "Let's get to the real question." A hush fell over the studio. "You've spent this interview defining yourself, challenging perception, controlling the conversation," she continued. "But let's cut through all of that. Are you stepping into politics?" For the first time, Barron hesitated. It was barely a pause, the briefest flicker of thought in his eyes. But Emily saw it. She recognized that split-second hesitation, the tiny crack in his otherwise flawless composure. Then, just as quickly, he smiled. "I won't enter politics just because my last name is Trump," he said. "But I also won't avoid it just because people think I shouldn't." A deep silence settled over the studio. It wasn't a confirmation. It wasn't a denial. It was something far more deliberate, a statement of intent without commitment. A door left just slightly open, inviting speculation. Emily knew what had just happened. He hadn't just answered the question. He had given the audience just enough to talk, just enough to wonder, just enough to keep the headlines going. And suddenly, she realized, he wasn't playing defense. He was playing the long game. She exhaled slowly, measuring her next move. She had one last card to play, One final question that could shift the tide. She smiled, sharp and knowing. "All right, Barron," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The air in the studio tightened. "If you truly believe in defining your own path," she said, letting the moment stretch, "then answer this. If one day America asked you to lead, would you say yes?" The audience held its breath. For the first time in the entire interview, the weight of the moment felt heavier. The camera zoomed in, capturing the flicker of thought in Barron's piercing blue eyes. The country was waiting for his response, hanging on the edge of what could turn this conversation from mere intellectual sparring into something historic. But Barron didn't rush to answer. He let the silence stretch, not out of hesitation, but out of control. It was a technique he had used all night, refusing to react on impulse, refusing to let the question dictate his pace. Finally, he exhaled softly and leaned forward slightly. "The real question," he said, his voice smooth, deliberate, "is not whether I would say yes." A ripple passed through the audience. "The real question is whether America is ready for a different kind of leader." Gasps. Whispers. The reaction was immediate. Emily's expression remained unreadable, but inwardly, she recognized the brilliance of the response. He hadn't confirmed. He hadn't denied. He had taken her question and reshaped it, leaving the public, not him, grappling for an answer. She tilted her head slightly, her lips pressing together in thought. He was good. Better than she had expected. "So you're saying you would consider it?" She pushed, her tone measured. Barron gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm saying leadership isn't just about wanting the position," he replied. "It's about whether the position is ready for what you bring to it." Emily inhaled slowly. He was giving the audience something to hold on to without ever giving her what she wanted: commitment. It was a tactic she had seen seasoned politicians use. Yet here was a young man, still untouched by the machine of Washington, wielding it effortlessly. She shifted gears. "Let's talk about responsibility," she said. "Regardless of whether you choose to enter politics or not, you carry a last name that comes with history. Some of it admired, some of it criticized. Have you ever, even for a moment, felt burdened by the expectations that come with it?" The question was surgical, designed to cut through his composure, to force him to reveal something beyond the controlled responses. Barron's expression remained calm, but something flickered in his gaze, an acknowledgement that he had been waiting for this moment. "The burden isn't the problem," he said finally. "The challenge is how you choose to carry it." The audience reacted again, murmurs spreading like a wave through the studio. Emily nodded, unfazed. "That's a thoughtful answer, Barron," she said. "But let's be real for a moment." She leaned in slightly, her voice sharpening. "You've spoken tonight about defining yourself, about not letting your last name dictate your future. But whether you like it or not, people will always see you as your father's son first." Her eyes locked onto his. "Do you think you can ever truly escape that shadow?" A calculated strike. Barron studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Then, he leaned back slightly, exuding the same composed confidence he had maintained all night. "I don't need to escape a shadow," he said. "I just need to stand in my own light." The room erupted. Applause. Cheers. A few audience members rising to their feet in admiration. Others remained seated, processing what they had just heard. Emily, for the first time that night, allowed herself a small smile, not of victory, but of recognition. She had spent years breaking down political figures, unraveling their carefully crafted personas. But tonight, she wasn't dealing with someone who needed to hide behind a persona. She was dealing with someone who knew exactly who he was. Still, she had one final card to play. She let the applause settle before speaking again, her voice quieter, but more piercing than before. "Since we're talking about standing in your own light," she said, "let's address the other question on everyone's mind." The energy in the room shifted. Even Barron's expression grew, slightly more serious. Emily didn't hesitate. "Your father has been one of the most controversial leaders in recent history. Some revere him. Others believe he was the most divisive figure of our time." She let the weight of the words settle before continuing. "Tell me, Barron, have you ever, even for a moment, been ashamed of something he has said or done?" A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. It was the question, the one that could define the entire interview. A no would paint him as blindly loyal, unwilling to acknowledge flaws. A yes would be seen as an outright betrayal of his father's legacy, an admission that would make headlines around the world. For the first time that night, the tension in the studio was almost suffocating. But Barron Trump did not flinch. He did not shift. He did not let the weight of the question force his hand. Instead, he simply asked, "Have you ever been ashamed of something President Biden has said or done?" The reaction was immediate. A sharp murmur rippled through the audience. It wasn't outrage, nor approval, just pure, unfiltered shock. Barron Trump had just flipped the script in a single sentence. Emily Harper blinked. She had prepared for countless responses, denial, defense, maybe even a carefully crafted diplomatic answer. But this? She hadn't seen it coming. For the first time that night, it felt like she had lost control of the conversation. She quickly regained her composure, adjusting in her chair, her voice controlled but firmer now. "This isn't about me, Barron," she countered. Barron's gaze remained steady. "Isn't it?" he asked, his voice smooth, deliberate. "You're a journalist. Your job is to challenge assumptions, to make the public think. So tell me, why is it a fair question to ask if I'm ashamed of my father, but if I ask the same about President Biden, suddenly it isn't?" The audience erupted, some clapping, others exchanging stunned glances. Emily inhaled deeply. She had spent her career pushing guests into uncomfortable corners. Yet somehow, tonight, she was the one feeling the pressure. She knew she had to regain control. "All right," she said, adjusting her approach. "Let's bring this back to you." The audience settled. Barron remained poised. "You've spent this interview proving that you can handle pressure, that you can hold your own," Emily said. "But let's cut through all of that. At the end of the day, do you truly know who you are? Or are you just a product of media perception?" A dangerous question, one designed to shake even the most prepared guests. Barron's response was immediate. "If I were just a name," he said, his voice calm, unwavering, "then why am I sitting here answering these questions myself?" The room erupted again, this time louder. Even Emily, despite everything, felt the weight of what had just happened. She had set the stage for an interrogation. Instead, Barron Trump had turned it into a declaration. And for the first time all night, she realized, she wasn't the one in control anymore. Emily exhaled slowly, pressing her lips together in thought. She had been in the business long enough to recognize when a moment had shifted, when the power in the room had transferred from the interviewer to the interviewee. And tonight, that moment had come. Barron Trump wasn't just holding his own. He was defining the narrative. She straightened slightly, determined to make her final move count. "Fair enough," she said, her tone lighter now, almost conversational. "But let's address the elephant in the room, Barron. You've spent your life under intense scrutiny. Some would say you've been carefully protected from the harsher realities of public life, while others argue that you've simply chosen to stay in the background. So tell me, was that by design, or were you just waiting for the right moment to step forward?" Barron tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "I wasn't hiding," he said, his voice steady. "I was listening." Emily arched a brow. "Listening to what?" "To everything," Barron replied. "To what people expect, to what they assume, to the way the world reacts before I even say a word. And I realized something. People don't just want leaders who speak. They want leaders who understand." A few members of the audience nodded. "So you see yourself as a leader?" Emily pressed. "I see myself as someone who refuses to be defined by anyone but myself," Barron corrected. "And if that means stepping up when the time is right, then yes, I'm ready for that." The room fell into a brief silence. It wasn't hesitation. It was realization. Emily set her notepad down completely. "All right," she said, leaning forward. "One final question." Barron gave her a small nod, waiting. "If you had to say one thing right now, to the millions of people watching, to the critics, the supporters, and those who are still trying to figure out who you really are, what would it be?" Barron didn't pause this time. His response was immediate. "Watch what I do next." A beat of silence. Then the audience erupted. Applause, murmurs, quiet exclamations of surprise. It wasn't just an answer. It was a promise. Emily let the moment settle, then nodded once, as if acknowledging something unspoken. "Well," she said with the faintest trace of a smile, "I guess we will." The cameras zoomed out, the studio buzzing with an energy that hadn't been there at the start. Across the country, social media was already alight with reactions, headlines being typed out in real time. And as the credits rolled, one thing was clear. This wasn't just another interview. It was the beginning of something far bigger. Because this particular time, Barron Trump wasn't just answering questions. Barron was completely changing the course of the conversation as he needed to. And the whole of America was listening to him.